Hey Tony, it is Thursday, and I've had a very busy, very interesting week. Although to first follow up with your question you asked me in your video, at the moment, we don't really have too many summer plans. I mean, I'm going to be interning with Community Legal Aid with Housing Court on Thursdays and Fridays, and I'm going to be working with my law firm. But otherwise, no plans over summer break at all. But let's go run through this week in a nutshell. We'll start on Saturday. And I will start Friday because last time you saw me was Thursday. Friday was uneventful. Ended up I didn't have work that day, so I ended up just coming home. Just spent the whole day relaxing at home, mostly playing Mass Effect because I was like, oh, I'm gonna enjoy this one day weekend. Because then on Saturday and Sunday I was gonna be writing a big paper. Well, then my friend Julie showed up. You remember Julie from high school? Her and I were best friends back senior year. Well, we found out that she actually lives just in New York, like 2 hours away. She lives just outside of New York City. So she ended up basically calling us up and say, hey, can I come over for this weekend because I'm bored? And Taylor and I were just like, well, sure, why not? So, here comes Taylor.
It was a mistake, because now we have to make plans for Easter with her.
Yeah, not that much of a mistake. It'll be fun.
I was making a joke.
I know. But so she ended up coming up on Saturday. And Saturday was miserable, so we didn't really do a lot. We just hung out, chatted, played our board games, including the great games of Betrayal at House on the Hill, Wizard School, and the best title for a game in history, oh my god, there's an axe in my head. The game of international diplomacy. I kid you not, that's actually what the game is called. It was fun, we enjoyed it. But then on Sunday, we ended up going to Boston because Julie had never been there. Taylor had been there a few times, but we hadn't been there in like a month. So we were like, yeah, sure, we'll go there. And it was really cool because we had a really good trip there. We walked around. I finally got to see Fenway Park, which was awesome. I've wanted to see that every single time I've gone to Boston. It wasn't until this one that I finally got to freaking see it, which made me very, very, very happy. But we ended up spending the day in Boston. It was beautiful out. It was I think it was like 60 degrees, a nice gentle breeze. We had a great time. We actually kept going back and forth as of whether or not we wanted to have our jackets on or not. But so that was that, and it was a really good trip. It was good seeing her again. I hadn't seen her in years. Like it had been probably about 3 years since I had talked to her, and we just caught back up like old friends, as old friends should, which was a really, really nice. It was a very nice visit. But then the week started, and I was like, oh, I was planning on doing all of this work over the weekend, but that didn't happen. Luckily, none of it's overdue, but it's going to be a busy weekend this time because, most of it's due on Monday and Tuesday. But Monday was just a normal day. Nothing particularly interesting happened. I had class and everything. But then Tuesday, we had something very cool that I was involved in something that was very neat. As you may or may not know, I don't know if I've told you, Tony, I'm a member of the Ward 6 Democratic Committee here in Springfield, and we were having a big event on Tuesday. It was a Know Your Rights training. So basically, we had a bunch of attorneys in the area, and actually including one of my professors, basically coming and explaining to citizens what their rights are. And that was a really good experience. Went over just like some of the basic things like immigration rights, LGBT rights, general legal rights, and voting rights. Because I don't know if you've heard of the different voting ID laws. That's a subject for an entirely different video, but I'll give you a brief overview right now. The voter ID laws basically are required. You're required to have some form of identification in order to vote, which at its face doesn't seem like a big deal. But when you actually look at the reasons behind the voter ID laws, they're almost exclusively used to disenfranchise minority voters that are more likely than not to vote Democrat. Like in particular, like North Carolina had the big fiasco of the voter ID laws because in their emails they explicitly made these ID laws to disenfranchise their black population. So that was that hit big news. I'll explain the intricacies of the voter ID laws in a later video, but not in this specific one. But so that was Tuesday. Wednesday was interesting too. Ended up in my evidence class, which is one of the classes I'm required to take for law school. It's basically just the laws of evidence, so you can actually use them in courts. Like I don't have my rule book on me, but you have to take the class because every single thing you do in litigation involves evidence. So it's kind of a big deal. But of my friends in my class, we've made what's called a study group, in which it's a group of you going to study. There's only 4 of us, and we got a lot done that one day, which was nice. I was on campus till like 9 p.m., which any day I'm on campus that late is never fun. But was what it was. And then that brings us to today. Now, today I ended up going to a fair housing and civil rights conference. It's going to be a weekend long conference. And so I got to dress up in a shirt and tie. I only got home about a half hour ago, but I decided to change immediately. But basically, it's this is the program for it. Now, this specific conference, it's the 11th time they're doing it. They've been doing it 11 years straight, and it's been a phenomenal experience. I am actually, what's very cool is I'm actually getting certified in fair housing. I went to fair housing training today, and so I'm actually going to have a certificate saying that I know that I can now, that when I go and practice law, I'll be able to practice in the realm of fair housing because I've been trained in what it does, what it means, which can really only help if I do end up going into housing. But I also ended up that was what I did earlier. The first speaker was a veteran of the civil rights movement, Diane Nash. She was one of the people who created the Freedom Riders, in which that was involved with the Montgomery bus strike that was led by Dr. King. And she was actually one of the head people on it. And she was a college student. She was your age. I think she was like 20 when it happened. So she was basically between your age and mine. And she was one of the main people who did like a bunch of sit-ins in the South. She was involved in the Freedom Riders, and she formed the organization, which was a student civil rights organization. So she was major celebrity amongst the civil rights crew. And she actually spoke to us, and it was an incredible speech. I will never be able to understand just the risks that these people took back in the civil rights movement before African Americans were protected with, in theory, the same rights that you and I have. This was right in the middle of Jim Crow South, so it was a phenomenal speech. I felt incredibly inspired because she was somebody who's younger than me and was one of the heads on one of the biggest moments in the civil rights movement, which is really, really, really interesting and just crazy when you think about it. But she was like the first speaker this morning, and then we had a couple different workshops. Obviously, the one workshop I did was the equal rights one. The fair housing one, which was awesome. It was a really good experience. Like I said, I learned a lot about fair housing in the state of Massachusetts and just in the nation itself. Like I had a very basic understanding of it through my work at Housing Court, but I learned so much more. And I'm actually going to be getting the PowerPoint that has all this information on it, which is going to be very, very, very nice. But so that was that one. And then the very last thing I did when I was at the conference, because I go back again tomorrow, but the last speech I saw, or the last panel I was involved with, was basically how to continue civil rights in the future. It was a bunch of Massachusetts attorneys and other people who are involved in civil rights litigation and civil rights organizations within the state came in and basically explained to us what things we can do. I got so many business cards, but I also got in contact with a lot of organizations that are very closely akin to the housing stuff that I think I want to do. And so it was a very great experience. Like as far as it goes, this conference here and just this week in general has left me incredibly inspired to continue to do whatever I can to help further human rights, civil rights, and everything, because civil rights are human rights and we all are entitled to have them. Tony, I'll see you on Tuesday.